Well, hello and welcome to you all. Thank you very much indeed for joining us online and in person. People are continuing to come into the room. We will fill up, but thank you to those of you who've joined us online from across Europe. It's wonderful to have you with us. You join us as we come live from this closing conference of the Drive Initiative in Brussels. And it's a great pleasure to be with you today. My name is Sue Saville. I was the medical correspondent at Britain's ITV News, now an independent health journalist, and thrilled to be guiding these discussions today, because we're going to be making a really important issue come to light, looking at, on a roundtable discussion, the benefits of real-world evidence on vaccine monitoring that are derived from the partnership between the private sector and the public sector. Drive, of course, the development of robust and innovative vaccine effectiveness has been going for some 5 years, and you'll be aware that it comes to a close in just over 3 weeks' time. And in this session, we're going to be considering what has been achieved in those 5 years, how the EU-wide collaborative platform that was set up to generate this robust data that's brand specific on influenza vaccines, what benefits it's brought. Has it set up a model? Has it set up proof of concept? Of course, the pandemic has come along since then and a lot has changed, but the issues are still absolutely vital to consider. So, should the monitoring of vaccine effectiveness be done through a public-private partnership, or should it be solely a public institution as set up by the ECDC, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control? Or perhaps there is a sustained role for the public-private partnerships that we have seen evidence about. So to get us going, I just want to make a point that you will have a chance to put your questions to our distinguished speakers in this session. And you can do so in person here in the room by raising your hands. We will have roving microphones come and pounce on you. And you can do so online. You've on the Zoom platform, you have that Q&A button at the bottom there. Pop your questions in there. We'll take as many as we can throughout this session. It's my great pleasure now to hand over for opening remarks to two very distinguished speakers. Firstly, Javier Diaz-Domingo, who is the director of the Vaccine Research Department at FISABIO, one of those acronyms. It stands for the Foundation for the Promotion of Health and Biomedical Research in Valencia region, Spain, I think, FISABIO, and also the Drive Public Coordinator. And he will be followed in opening remarks by Cédric Mahé, who is the head of modeling, epidemiology and data science, vaccines at Sanofi, and is the FPA lead for Drive. Javier, welcome to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue, for the introduction. Thank you very much all for having come to Brussels today, and for those that are at home or at work online. So welcome, everybody. This is the final forum of Drive. As mentioned, Drive has been a 5-year project that had a very challenging objectives. Working together with 16 partners, both public institutes, public hospitals, public networks, and the industry, we have successfully set up a platform to assess the influenza vaccine effectiveness by brand. And I would like to highlight 3 or 4 points that are worth mentioning at the early beginning. First of all, we showed that public-private partnerships can work, and that they can work being scientifically sound with neutrality. And we are able to manage to have robust results with a very transparent governance model. However, having that transparent governance model for PPP collaboration, in which I would highlight the firewall of the industry in the data, and also very important that we have an independent scientific committee which with 5 very well-renowned scientists in the vaccine, in the influenza vaccine field, we haven't been able to convince about the benefits of PPP. And we found a lot of PPP reluctancy to collaborate. And I always think that this reluctancy is very similar to the vaccine reluctancy or the vaccine negligence. So PPP reluctancy is based on beliefs, is based on concerns, on perceptions, and not on data. And then if we are not able to convince anti-vaccines, it's going to be difficult to convince anti-PPP because they, by different means, they do not want to hear our different models. And if we cannot communicate with them, it's going to be very difficult to do the next step forward. The second point I would like to highlight about Drive is that we set up a platform with 13 hospitals and networks and public health institutes that have, and we have managed to assess the influenza vaccine effectiveness of 8 out of the 11 brands that have been circulating in Europe for the last few years. However, we had the pandemic, and with the pandemic, there was no influenza, there were social changes, and then the Drive platform didn't grow up in the last 2 years because of the PPPs, the new model in Europe, and the lack of influenza. Then the third one is that we had a robust information system. And that system has allowed to give results in a rapid way. Nearly, I would say, it's not like that, but nearly in real time. But we have managed to respond very quickly to the needs of the European Commission, of the EMA, and of the public. And the last step, and I think this is very interesting, is that following the Drive governance model, and with the pandemic that we had the new COVID vaccines, we have managed in less than 8 months to set up the COVID Drive, which is a PPP that whose objective is to assess the COVID vaccine effectiveness by brand. So I think that in general, Drive in these 5 years has set up a very nice framework of PPPs. We have managed to get our objectives in of the project, of the IMI project, and then the next step is what is going to be the future. And for that, thank you, Cedric.
So here I'm representing the dark side of the PPP, as some of people think, because I'm the private sector. And but I want to emphasize that more than ever, I think that the pandemic has shown that we need all to work together, public and private sector. There is not people developing vaccine, people using it, people evaluating it. So we need to all work together to basically fight against those public health threats. And I think that it's more important because we are in increasingly complex environment. Today, we are not here to talk about the past, about the challenge, about the controversies. We are here to discuss about the future and how this kind of Drive platform can become a stepping stones to evaluate vaccine performance in Europe. More than ever, we all need to combine our efforts, meaning public sector, private sector, to evaluate in a timely manner the benefit risk of the vaccine for the benefit of the EU citizen, not only to optimize the use of the resource, to avoid duplicating efforts, which will be a waste of energy and a waste for public health, but really to optimize and to build on the expertise of each of the different partners. Let's not forget that all the vaccines we are currently using in Europe are developed by industry partners based on their sole studies. So why data which are trustful before registration become non-trustful after registration? So this is why I think that we know how we develop vaccine, we have a lot of expertise, and I think that we can work with our public health partners to basically optimize the evaluation of the programs. So I am really convinced that today will pave the way toward a successful collaboration between EU institutions, private sector, and civil society. And this kind of high-level stakeholder roundtable today is really important to discuss this timely topic. And it's timely because I think that we are under pandemic. We may have over pandemic. We have also a lot of new vaccine coming in, and we don't want basically to start evaluating the vaccine which are available in Europe 2 years after their launch. So it's important in terms of safety and public health. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. It's very helpful to get your thoughts even from the dark side, or especially from the dark side, where we want to hear what all the stakeholders can contribute to this really important debate. Going forward, how can EU citizens most benefit from whatever platforms are going to be set up for the vaccine monitoring and indeed more broadly for disease surveillance, looking ahead for the protection of all Europeans and perhaps some Brits. So we have with us a great panel who are going to pick apart some of these arguments. Just to say, we were expecting Mr. Wolfgang Philippe from the HERE organization, but unfortunately, the European Commission has some important emergency business today. I mean, what could be more important? And sadly, Philippe Wolfgang cannot be with us today, but we do have online joining us by the magic of the internet. We have Dr. Marco Cavalieri, who is, hello, greetings. He is the head of Biological Health and Threats Vaccine Strategy at the European Medicines Agency. Where exactly are you then, Marco? Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining from the EMA offices in Amsterdam.
Lovely.
And good afternoon to all of you.
Great to have you with us. And in person, we're very lucky to have two fabulous speakers I'd like to invite to the stage. Hanna Neuyak, who is the Chief Physician, Deputy Head of Unit Infectious Disease Control and Vaccines at the National Institute for Health and Welfare, THL in Finland. Welcome. And also we have Sibilia Kalici, who is the Executive Director of Vaccines Europe. Welcome to the stage. Well, it's fantastic to have such great speakers with us. And I do hope that we can put all sides of this debate together. Marco, you're sitting very attentively there. Let's come firstly to you, just to get an overview. What is the value then of real world evidence when you're monitoring vaccine effectiveness and indeed for disease surveillance?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear and has been clear since decades now, the value that real world evidence can bring, specifically in the area of vaccines, but not only. But I would say in the area of vaccines, we already have a good demonstration of the fact that these real world evidence studies or effectiveness studies were able to provide us with extremely useful information with respect to the performance of the vaccines in different settings, in different regions, and beyond what is the evidence that arrives to us as regulators at the time of approval via randomized clinical trials. And not forgetting that many vaccines can be approved also based on surrogate markers, essentially immune markers such as correlates of protection, but even in situations where correlates of protection are not established, is possible still to action and trigger regulatory decisions that could lead to the establishment of a positive benefit risk for vaccines that then get approved. But then after they are approved and deployed, it's very important to collect additional information with respect to how they perform in real life, and indeed also to define if there is any adjustment with respect to the benefit risk, how they should be used in which population. And these data, of course, are helpful not only for regulators in the regulatory cycle of this vaccine post-approval, but also for public health authorities, and particularly for the technical advisory group that are supposed to decide how to use and how to recommend the use of specific vaccines that get approved. And therefore, these data are really precious for a number of different stakeholders. And lastly, I would say they are also really a good tool to demonstrate what is the real impact of vaccination, what we can achieve with vaccines. And I have to say that during this pandemic with COVID-19 vaccines deployed, even after pretty large randomized clinical trials showing their efficacy, it has been so important to constantly monitor what was their performance in real life according to different endpoints, such as hospitalization, mortality, or admission to the intensive care unit, but also how they perform after a long time from vaccination, or also very importantly in the context of changes with the viral composition that is in circulation. So really we have seen that this data being crucial in terms of decision, not only by regulators, but also for public health authorities, but also to inform the public about what is the advantage of vaccination and why people should get vaccinated. So I believe that despite you will always find some methodologies that would say the randomized clinical trials are the only option for collecting robust evidence, I think we have more and more evidence that will show that well-designed observational studies for vaccines are able to provide robust evidence with respect to the vaccine effectiveness, and this data can be used for regulatory and public health purposes. And I think the lesson learned is that, as we've seen in this pandemic, that the majority of the data that were emerging in a timely manner with respect to the effectiveness of the vaccines were coming from other regions than Europe. So we need to do better. We need to improve the way we conduct effectiveness studies in Europe. And we need to see how to build an infrastructure that would be able to give us, even in real time, what is the situation with respect to the effectiveness of the vaccines that we are using. And for this reason, as it was alluded before, with the ECDC, the EMA has decided to move one step ahead and to create a platform that would help in streamlining the design and the conduction and the implementation of such studies across a number of different vaccines that are in use in Europe, in order to be proactive and to come up timely with evidence with respect to the effectiveness and the safety as well, because we are not forgetting also about the safety side, as sometimes it's very important to conduct observational study or large study that could help us in understanding what is the incidence of rare adverse events that might be related to vaccination. So, so this is why we felt important to do something additional in this regard. And of course, DRIVE has been really an interesting experiment, I would say, for the sake of establishing this network and conducting effectiveness study according to a model in which both the private sector and the public sector are collaborating. We have always been open to this type of setup, and we never had any major problem with this. But as you know, there are many public health authorities that have problems with respect to an open collaboration with industry. And therefore, that's one of the additional reasons why we felt that strengthening what we're doing with ECDC is important in the future, because at the end of the day, what matters is not so much who's conducting the study, but that these studies are done and they deliver the data that we all need.
Marco, thank you very much. There's a great deal in there. Thank you. And I would like to point out that this event is a roundtable open to the public. Just very briefly, picking up on a point you made there about real world evidence. For those in the public who might not have the scientific background, what is the difference? Is there a discrepancy between the real world evidence and the clinical trial studies? Why is it so important to get that real world evidence? What difference does it make?
Right, so the clinical trials or randomized clinical trials are less prone to biases, and of course would deliver more robust estimates of efficacy and safety as well. But the intrinsic issue with the clinical trials is that you can run large clinical trials, but it's extremely demanding to run very large randomized clinical trials, let's say with a size of more than 100,000 individuals including, and even more than 50,000 can be challenging. With COVID-19, we've seen studies that were conducted fairly rapidly with approximately up to 40,000 individual randomized. But this is not the norm and has been rather exceptional. And so we have to think that the clinical trials will have some limitation in terms of detecting certain type of outcomes. For example, even with these large COVID-19 trials, to detect what is the impact on severe COVID-19 hospitalization and death was not possible even with 40,000 patients recruited, because there were too few cases to have a robust estimate of what was the efficacy in this regard. And also with respect to safety, the problem is that, or luckily, vaccines, when they are associated with adverse event, these tend to be very rare. So in the order 1 every 10,000 or even 1 every 100,000. If you think about TTS, which is the thrombosis with thrombocytopenia that we're seeing with some of the vaccines used for COVID-19. So clearly the clinical trials are not sensitive enough to really determine the occurrence of this event and whether there is an increased incidence of this event after vaccination. That's why we have to resort to observational studies, and we have to conduct them in the best way possible so that we have robust estimate of what is happening and we can then come to conclusion in a swift way.
Marcus, thank you. And stay with us. We're going to come back to you. And I think there may well be questions coming in online and in the room. We've got a very large turnout online, I'm delighted to say, and I hope that questions will be coming into the Q&A in the Zoom function, and we can grill you a little further, Marco. But Hannah, I'm interested from the position of Finland. What's your experience been like? Marco there referred to the good proof of concept and the practice that's been achieved through DRIVE. What's been your experience in terms of collating this real-world evidence?
Well, actually, thanks for the question. Finland, since 1970s, has done PPP. So I come from a domain that actually has done it a lot, and whether it has to do with our geographic position that we are used to working with and getting and surviving in all kinds of environments. In 1970s, it was the meningococcal outbreak that was actually national, and we then introduced a vaccine and did a phase 2 and 3 and 4 study in that context and controlled it. Since then, we've done a PPP with Haemophilus influenza type B vaccine. We've done pneumococcal vaccine. Actually, we were one of the phase 4s that the marketing authorization company had to do because EMA requested it, and they chose to do that in Finland. And so we've been part of these works for quite a while, and we have built trust between the Public Health Institute and the company and the regulatory authorities, both in Finland and in Europe. And from that perspective, it's very hard for me to, I can understand what my colleagues in other countries, where their hesitance is coming from. And the elements that Javier was mentioning, there are elements that are psychological, that are not necessarily fact-driven, but they are impressions. And this is something that we need to work on, despite the fact that we have DRIVE, which is a proof of concept that you can build rules of collaboration that are very transparent. There still is work to do. I would like to point out to some of the issues that have been very useful for a public health institute and the scientists working in there are the development of the protocols, is the method development that we've been doing. And those are important both for the academia, for the companies and us in public health. And it's been extremely useful. We cross-fertilize each other in there. And in that, I think that we should learn better how we use the secondary data, the real world data. In that, I would also like to propose that we put more effort into bringing to each country the vaccine registers, and the vaccine registers and the disease registers are of high quality, and they are publicly available so that the secondary data use can really take off the ground, providing us an avenue to the real world data that we do need. And the quality of that data needs to be known, and so that we can trust those results. From that light, Marco, what you said that you're strengthening the ties with ECDC and EMA, I'm very glad to hear that, because ECDC is also strong proponent of vaccine registers and disease-specific registers. And I think we should leverage this so that the real-world data arising is really open to everyone, and collaborations can go across dark sides as well as light sides because I think it's a matter of shades and how we deal with those shades.
And it's really interesting, as early adopters then of PPP, the public-private partnership model then, how you say about building trust there, Hannah. That's going to be a key thing. It was touched on earlier about the hesitancy, trust, confidence. It's vital. How did you do that? How did you build that trust? Because it looks like that needs to be done on a wider scale across Europe.
Well, I guess with us, it was a matter of resources and the pressure that there were these needs. I mean, there was a huge outbreak that needed to be controlled. And through that, we demonstrated that it worked. Right now, I have to say that maybe some of the distrust has led to the development that we will not do phase 3 studies with industry in our institute any longer. We just established a state majority-owned company called Finvac, and that will be doing the phase 1, 2, 3 studies, but the phase 4s will remain with us. And here I see that we still need to work the concept further on how we open up what we do in such a way that the different players understand what we're doing.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. There's a lot of evidence in there and some pointers as to how this might be taken forward. Sibylla, at Vaccines Europe, each of the manufacturers, of course, has their own insight into their brand-specific vaccines. So they bring that expertise, that know-how, those insights. And then what is the best way then to harness that expertise, to get in on that know-how and that data?
So I think what is, to go back to answer to this question, I think this is really important to understand the complexity of the vaccines. Vaccines are specific products with their own features that are really, really specific and beyond any other interventions. They are specific in the complexity of the product itself. So it's a complex biological product, complex to develop, complex to manufacture and deliver. And when we say deliver, is to deliver with trust as well. Yeah. And there is no one that knows better the products than the vaccines developer itself. So that's really important. It's also complex in the sense that they have this unique public health feature as well. So we don't vaccinate one individual or another. We do vaccinate at a population level. So we have a public health value in terms of societal and economic values that goes beyond any other intervention. And when we vaccinate at a population level. So the need for delivering on safety and efficacy is critical. It's critical because you're not allowed to have mistakes. So in that regard, in normal time, and just putting the pandemic aside, in normal time when you want to deliver and manufacture a new vaccines, it takes 10 to 15 years to develop an innovative vaccines. Why is that? Because you need, as Marco mentioned, consequent sample size in terms of for the clinical trials to ensure the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccines. It takes on average 12 to 36 months to produce, and beyond 36 months potentially as well with regards to the most complicated vaccines. And then it's also how to ensure that while you have a great product, it's safe and efficacious, but it has no value if it doesn't reach the arm of the patients. And that's, again, how you bring confidence, trust, and this is just to show, and I think everybody touched on the issue of the complexity. I mean, the pandemic really relieved the complexity of the vaccine environment, the vaccine ecosystem. And because this is so complex, there is no way we can fight against vaccines preventable disease in a trustful environment in silos. And that's really important to take into consideration. So this is why silo doesn't deliver with regards to public health. And this is also why the public-private partnerships that we've seen conducted through IMI really demonstrated the value to society. And to that, and so companies are the ones that knows about, as you mentioned, the know-how, they have the infrastructure, they have specific skills that are valuable for the public health institutes. So that should not be denied. I think the value as well of public-private partnership, and I think this is what IMI try to also leverage, is how to increase the trust in the pharmaceutical sector. Because we need to demonstrate to the society that there is an added value in those collaboration in terms of delivering to them. And trust is to connect to vaccine hesitancy, in fact, and vaccines confidence, because vaccine hesitancy is a multifactorial issue. So I could spend a full hour explaining to everybody what vaccine hesitancy is, but as part of the component of vaccine industry, hesitancy is the trust in the product, the trust in the companies delivering the product, the trust in the institutions delivering the program. And if we create silos and demonstrate to the societies that there is discrepancy between what the public sector is doing and what the public-private is doing, you basically induce vaccine hesitancy. You induce hesitancy in the private sector, and you contribute to the vaccine hesitancy as well. And vaccine hesitancy is an important barrier to the performance of the program. So this is something that needs to be taken into account also. And last, the point is the complexity of the vaccine ecosystem is that everything is interconnected. So it's not only about surveillance on one side, effectiveness of the strain circulating, effectiveness of the vaccines, monitoring on the other side. Everything has an impact on everything else. The vaccine industry, we need the scientific guidance from the public health institutes in order to ensure that we develop the right vaccines that are needed by the citizens based on what is circulating outside. You need the vaccines coverage rates as well in order to assess whether we are at risk of an outbreak or not. If we don't have timely monitoring of the vaccination uptake, there is no way we can assess the needs for the vaccines and the supply. And when we go, so if you take into consideration that it can take up to 3 years to produce a specific vaccine, if you have suddenly an outbreak because we didn't know actually that we were just at 70% for an MMR vaccination program in the country X, there is no way you can anticipate and forecast these needs. So when the outbreak happens, you're just in a reactive mode. So it's panic, it's complete panic. So this is why it's just to illustrate that. And this is just for Europe, by the way. And from what I do know, viruses have no borders. And we've seen it with the pandemic. They do travel with flights, trains, ferries, whatsoever. So it's not only about Europe on its own, it's how Europe is positioning itself in a global context. And what we know as well with regards to public-private partnership is working between the industry and the private sector, the public sector, is happening elsewhere. So you were mentioning, Marco, about elsewhere they do actually manage the timely monitoring, and we are lagging behind at European level. But key questions is why that? If it works elsewhere, knowing that elsewhere we do have this public-private collaboration between industry and the public sector. We have the example of the CDC in the US. We have the example of GCVI in the UK. It's working as well in Germany. There is also example with WHO. So just to end up, the unique specificity of the environment, this complexity makes the work in silo not delivering on the public health needs potentially.
Thank you, Sibylle. Gosh, again, a lot in there. And you touch on IMI. I think we have someone with us, Dr. Pierre Mulien. And of the IMI, now I believe that IMI does radical collaboration, allegedly. Do you want to tell us about that radical collaboration, Dr. Pierre Mulien from the IMI, a little bit about how that can work, and picking up some of the points that Hannah, Marco and Sibylle have made there, what difference that can make on a global level?
Is working. I think
we're hearing you.
I hope that Marco can hear me from Amsterdam. So indeed, we've already heard quite a bit about the PPP model. I always say, or I'm always saying, that PPPs are not for everyone and not for everything, but for some things They really are the only thing that can advance certain topics. And so there's no surprise that in the now 200 project portfolio of IMI, after 4.8 billion euro of public and private investment, that we have done an awful lot in fields like antimicrobial resistance, a true market failure, dementia, which is a huge scientific black box, and where there are no magic bullets to be seen so far. Areas like the use of medications in pediatrics and in pregnant women, and of course, vaccine effectiveness studies, and they're right up there in the most challenging. And in a project like DRIVE, you know, I think it was said already, the mere fact that this project exists is a value add already to the ecosystem. And there have been, you know, I know difficult discussions around the involvement of public health authorities in certain countries, of ECDC itself, issues around governance, the management of conflicts of interest, and this, where else are we going to have those discussions, if not in a multidisciplinary platform where we can do radical collaboration? That's what radical collaboration is. This was a term coined by the ex-commissioner Koleś Moidasz at our 2010, our 10th anniversary. So these platforms, this neutral platform that we have created, now multiplied 200 times in different projects across many, many disease areas. And as we heard from Javier and from Cedric, you know, a lot of goals have already been achieved through DRIVE. And indeed, the model has been used for COVID DRIVE. So this is the kind of thing that we can have. We hope that we've built more trust in the ecosystem, and among, I think I'm sure, because I see it every day, that the interactions among competing pharmaceutical industries has completely changed. That paradigm has changed. And so that transformation of the ecosystem is palpable when we look across the portfolio. And then no matter where you are in the multidisciplinary cog and wheel thing, you have to have, if you're in one of these, you have to have moved in order for you to have been successful. Everybody moves out of their normal comfort zone. And this is where I mean, Marco can correct me, but I think EMA has moved. Pharmaceutical industry have moved. The way we engage with patients has moved. The way we engage with HTA bodies, the way health economists think of things has moved. And this is the value of this multidisciplinary consortia building that we've done over, as I say, many, many different areas of interest, where the challenge is there that needs this kind of partnership. Once again, not for everyone and not for everything. So I'm going to finish right now. As you know, although it says IMI on my badge, we are now in IHI, the Innovative Health Initiative, which is just pushing more boundaries, because now we're not only going to do, our ecosystem is not going to be only to do with medicines development, but we're going to be able to, with the diagnostic sector, with the medtech sector, with the digital sector, with the imaging sector, with and so on and so forth, we are going to be able to play much more holistically everything from preventive strategies, early diagnostics, disease interception, disease treatment, and care. And so this opens the door for a much more integrated system, taking into account and taking advantage of the technology convergence that's going on anyway across these areas, taking advantage of that and using the same trusted principle of the PPP, the neutral platform, bringing those people together to advance specific topics that lend themselves to these types of partnerships. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Pierre Moulin. Well, let's let Marco pick up on that now. And Marco, Pierre was saying there that we've all changed, all the systems have changed, the EMA itself has changed. Has that change been enough to mean that the needle on the dial must shift now? Has it been enough to push this forward in terms of how the monitoring is going to go forward now?
Yeah, I believe indeed a lot of things have been changing, and we are constantly changing. Whether it will be circular or linear, we will see. But I believe that what we've seen already is that the EMA has been asked to speak to European citizens directly during this pandemic. We have to take action that in the past we never used to do. We have been collaborating with the public health side in a way that has no precedence. And really, and also, you know, talking about this specific topic, indeed, what we are building with the ECDC in terms of a platform for monitoring the benefit risk of vaccines post-approval is something that we in the past never have been thinking of doing. And this is because we sense that we have to engage more, to be more proactive, and also to contribute to the evidence generation, and not only passively waiting for others to generate the data and submitting them to us for a regulatory approval, which has to follow the standard approaches. So, so indeed, a lot of new ideas have been floating around, and I think this crisis has been a catalyst for this change, and we will have to see how far we can go with that. Also, not forgetting the international dimension. For us, it will be extremely important that everything works better within the European Union, but at the same time, we are also working with other regions and countries outside of the European Union to try to gather evidence that can be as homogeneous as possible and can derive really large sample size and adequate power to come to conclusion as soon as possible, because that is in the interest of the citizen, and that's all we care about.
Thank you. It's great that some questions are coming in already from the audience. Let's just pick up one or two of those points. First question, are we using real-world evidence for first approval or post-marketing surveillance? Is that one for you, Marco, or perhaps Sibylla, you'd like to take that? Or Hannah? Hannah, what would you think?
Well, I mean, when we, sorry. If we take the COVID vaccine, for example, it will be very, very difficult to have any phase 3s anymore. I think there we need to jump and go to phase 4s and use the immune bridging. What is possible with the influenza vaccines, if we think about the brand-specific effectiveness, which is in the core of DRIVE, then it's very clear from the DRIVE experience that you need huge sample sizes and to come up with meaningful results, and then it's very much dependent on the end user. So where do we need the brand-specific effectiveness? Countries are very different. Some have open tenders where the price pays a lot. On other countries base much more their decisions on what the effectiveness is. So then again, like what Marco was saying, we need to see what the country's needs are, what the community needs are, what the world needs are, and they may dictate on which data are to be used and which methodology are to be used.
Thank you. And let's now dive in some of that detail about the ECDC platform that's been set up, a public-only platform with millions of euros funding. And can it run in parallel? Do we need to have both a public-only partnership organization to have vaccine monitoring, or can there be, how's it going to work? So, Sibylla, what do you think? Is there any way you could have two platforms running in parallel, given that they're going to compete for resources, for study sites, and so on?
So, from the industry perspective, this is hardly going to be feasible, because the duplication of sites, because we cannot compete on the same sites. So the access to actually the data and the infrastructure, which is at the national level, is not infinite. So more you actually cluster, more you reduce actually the meaningfulness of the data that you collect. So if we start duplicating our activities in collecting effectiveness data, we are just going to loosen the quality of the data we collect, and potentially the end outcomes. If the end outcomes is public health and citizens, we should deliver the best quality of data. And it's not by creating duplications in competitions with sites that is going to happen. But in the same way, it's also about good use of the resources. The immunization world is very complex. The level of expertise that you need is huge, and the resources are scarce, in fact. So if we duplicate the activities, we are going to be dependent on the level of resources that we have, and this is going to be difficult as well. So that's for the know-how, but it's also about budget. I mean, we had the IMI Drive initiative, which is what, 10 million euro, with 5 million euro by cash by the Commission and 5 million euro in FTE by the industry. And then we are going to have today an 18 million euro public solely initiative to redo the same thing as Drive and COVID Drive. Is it a good use of the public money? I'm raising this because it's and beyond actually the industry per se, is me as a taxpayer. I'm a taxpayer as well, and I'm questioning, and I'm maybe lucky to have the opportunity to assess this world and to work in this world, to question that. Is that a good use of resources in a time where we've seen the need in terms of money to tackle a pandemic, for example. We still need money to tackle the impact of the war in Ukraine, and this is also something. So could we also have a more responsible use of our resources, whether it is financial, whether it is human resources and know-how? I think this is an important point to tackle.
Thank you. Marco, would you like to pick up on that briefly? The work that you're doing with the ECDC, sadly not with us today, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are then on that possible duplication of resources, of study sites. Can these run in parallel?
I think we need to avoid duplication. That's my short answer, and we need to figure out how to do that. Clearly here, the conundrum is that industry has obligation to conduct this study in the post-approval as part of their risk management plan. And there is an expectation that industry plays its part in generating this evidence. At the same time, as we said before, we have a situation in which we have public health authorities that are struggling for a number of reasons to work with industry. So the question is, what then can we do? And that's what we are brainstorming right now, also with European institutions, to see how the new platform that we are setting up with ECDC will fit in the overall landscape of efforts that are conducted also by the private sector in this area. And if this platform is going to be the main driver of real-world evidence in the future with respect to the use of the vaccines, we have to think then what role industry should play on the funding, on contribution on the science and other aspects. And these are all areas that we need really to tackle. The soonest, the better, but we have to move, of course, stepwise and try, first of all, to establish really the ability of EMA and ECDC in having networks and having the potential of conducting this study. And then we will look into this as well, because I can only agree it's important that we avoid that. Many players are trying to do the same type of trial, and maybe even with the same sites.
Indeed. Gentlemen here in the room, would you like to make your question? Would you like to say who you are, please? Announce yourself and give us your question.
I'm Peter Niels. I'm from IABS EU. I'm one of the partners of Drive, and I'm an ex-regulator. And I fully agree with what Marco said, an ex-colleague. But I think we have the solution, only it is not used. The European Commission and the European Parliament have clearly stated that all data gathered with public money are from the public. And anybody in the European Union has the right to get these raw data. Thus, in fact, there is no problem. All data that are generated in this field on effectiveness, on real-world evidence, should be public available. And here we have some problems because some of the public health institutions refuse to share the raw data. And that is against the spirit of the European Commission. So I would say that the European Commission would take its responsibility and try to get all these data public available. And who does the analysis? Everybody who wants to do the analysis, he has the right. If it is the University of Helsinki or GSK or ECDC, they are all allowed to do that, but they should have access to all the data generated.
Thank you very much for that point. Open data. Any one of our panel want to pick up on that briefly? Hannah.
Yeah, I can just comment on that. Yes, we do have a secondary data use law in Finland, and it's put in practice. And actually, anybody can access to the data through those. Fin data is the port of entry, and you need to make an application to it, and you can get all the data. However, it carries a cost. And what we've seen in real world is that small academic groups, for example, don't have such monies that they could avail of the data that they have actually collected themselves and provided in the databases. But bigger players can make use of it. So we need to revisit this secondary data law, that it provides equal opportunity, which is not money driven as it now is. So there will be changes in our law. But just like what Peter was saying, the spirit of the secondary data use is there, and the data is available. What we need to be sure, of course, is that we are GDPR relying, and that the individuals' rights are respected so that individuals are not identified through that data.
Thank you. I'd like to now bring in Professor Harish Nair, who is online joining us from, who's at the University of Edinburgh, is part of the Rescue Promise coordinator and co-director of the Centre for Global Health. If we can bring in Professor Harish Nair, perhaps to put those points then about leveraging collaboration to enhance EU surveillance systems. Do we, by the magic of the internet, have our professor? We do. Lovely to see you.
Hello. Yes, good to join you all virtually and be with you. And I've been following the discussions that have taken place over the last hour or so very keenly. I think, very interesting points that have been made here. And, it reminds me of the African proverb that says that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And to me, I think there's so much value that we've sort of seen both in the rescue and in the Promise Consortium by having the industry partners along with the public sector partners, that there is so much of cross-fertilization of ideas that takes place. But but more importantly, that results that get generated by the consortium can immediately feed into drug or vaccine development, and I think there's so much value there. The important thing here is that obviously I don't know whether in the last 5 years or 7 years the PPP hesitancy has come down at all. To me, it seems that has not. There's been no change in position, at least of the people I knew of. None of them have really sort of converted. And I think it's more than organizations. It is individuals who are having this hesitancy, and they sort of are blocking the partnership. And I was wondering if based on the experience that you've all had in Drive, whether you've been able to work on this in a larger sort of scheme of things to get people who are not very much keen on this kind of partnership, to try and sort of allay some of their apprehensions, fears, and get them on board. Because I think, we've seen the value of having the industry working with the government and public sector during the COVID pandemic. I mean, the speed at which COVID vaccines have been developed and implemented, I think in vaccination programs wouldn't have really been possible if we were working in silos. So, and the next pandemic is probably knocking at our doors already. So how do we try and make full use of all that momentum that has been built? And I think there's a lot of goodwill in the public at the moment and I think we should try and sort of leverage and capitalize on it. Over.
Well, Harish, that's really interesting. And what has come up over and again about the hesitancy? Is it a perception? Is it an impression? Is it down to individuals, as you say? So what about building trust and increasing transparency? Would you say transparency is greater in public bodies or in private organizations?
I think there is a lack of transparency at both ends. I'm not sure whether public sector is any more transparent than the private sector. Possibly in some areas we are, but like for other areas, like the colleague before me who had sort of the question on data access, he was saying it's the same thing. I mean, countries sometimes do not allow access to the individual patient data. Certainly, we've learned in Rescue and Promise that data cannot go outside the country at an individual level patient data. So if you wanted to do the analysis, then you can only possibly, if with appropriate funding, to be able to access those data that you've generated. Public money has been used to generate those data, can be used. But if you wanted to then pool the data, because you wanted a larger sample size to understand vaccine effectiveness, for example, then you don't have the access to those data. I think this is the thing where I think there is to an extent there's lack of transparency. Also, people do not make their codes available transparently. I mean, this is another thing. Over the last 5 or 7 years, that has improved. And industry has improved likewise as well. I think there is more openness to collaborating with public sector partners in making even null results publicly available, publishing these results. I think there is greater interest within the industry partners as well. But I think there's still a gap. There is a bridge that needs to be built here to try and make sure that there is greater transparency. And I think transparency, you're right, will improve the trust, the confidence, both of all the partners and the stakeholders that were involved, including the members of the public. Over.
Thank you. You sound like you're an airline pilot. Over to us. Right. I think we have a question in the audience here. Gentlemen, if you'd like to say who you are and announce yourself.
So I'm Patrick May. I'm a co-founder of VAC4EU, Vaccine Monitoring Collaboration for Europe, which is the result of a previous IMI project that was called Advance. And I think that VAC4EU is a good example of what we are talking today. It's true that the first reliable, I would say, public-private partnership is certainly IMI. It's more than 20 years old, and it was one of the first putting together public and private institution. So what I would like to say, it's not a question of PPP among scientists. We are all convinced that working together, it's certainly better. We can go further than just working alone. The problem comes from the population, because people will not trust. We have seen that with a lot of vaccine, and not specifically the COVID-19 vaccine. People will not trust data coming from the industry. And if we work, if public institution work with private industry, the population in general will start to doubt about the results that are provided. And VAC4U, for example, is more sort of a public institution in the sense that we are not working for the industry, we are working with the industry, which is a major difference. And all what we do, it's open. You can access to all our data, you can access to all our publications. You go to Zenodo, it's free of charge. You can have access to all what we do on vaccine. And I think that the major issue is to convince the general population to trust what we do as independent, transparent, open institution working or organization working on vaccine.
Thank you. That's a very good point. And I'd like to bring in now to perhaps widen that discussion a bit from vaccines to more general disease surveillance, looking at diagnostic platforms for many other pathogens that could be out there lurking, ready to attack us. Professor Bruno Lina, we have with us here in the room, which is fantastic. What about that then? What about developing the diagnostic platforms for other pathogens so that we can stay safe?
Well, the thing is that, respiratory viruses are nasty viruses. They kill people and they tend to change. And they tend to be responsible for syndromes that are very similar from one virus to the other. And we have seen that with the pandemic. So you can't say based on clinical symptoms, what is the virus that is responsible for the disease. So when you're dealing with efficacy regarding preventions, using vaccines or using other means of prevention, you need to know exactly what you're looking for. And the purpose of having a large, I would say a broader diagnostic capacity, just beyond influenza and the other vaccine preventable diseases in respiratory diseases, is interesting because then it will tell you what is really the scene that is there, how many viruses are there, what are the difference, if there's an unmet needed based on new vaccine that could be included in the vaccine program because it's linked to a disease burden. And actually what we want to do as much as possible is to have a broad view of what are the different viruses that are circulating, what are their impact, what is doing the vaccine that we use for influenza, for SARS-CoV-2 in terms of epidemiology for the other viruses, and try to have a kind of comprehensive set of data that will tell you exactly what are the causes of the respiratory viruses in terms of disease impact and so forth. So to do that, you can't just be alone in your country, you can't be alone in your room, you have to have a really broad perspective. And that's what we do with our networks, where we try to collect as much as possible information from different countries, different regions of the world, different kind of countries, I would say, poor or middle and high income countries, and to try to have a clear picture of what is the epidemiology of the viruses there and what we can do on that. And all this data actually is publicly available. Sometimes industry is bad, but sometimes it's very useful. And it's useful when it's working as a charity. And actually the GIHSN network is actually working on a system which is more or less based on a charity system, where industry is providing money to do work just by our own on the epidemiology of the virus. We collect data, we collect clinical data, we have a connection between clinical data and viruses that are detected. And this is publicly available. Everybody can go and pick up the data that is there to do investigations based on the fact that there's a project that has been submitted and that we accept that this project would be in line with the perspective of what is the purpose of this set of data. So again, back to your first question, we need to have a clear view of what we are looking for. Too many times, there's been evaluation on vaccines that has been done only on clinics, and that's not possible anymore. And we know that there's a need for improvement in terms of detection of the virus, being sure what is the virus there. And we have even to go beyond that when we look at influenza viruses that are changing. What is genotype of the virus that is causing the disease? Is there some changes that would be seen in the virus responsible for vaccine failure because of the change of the virus that would make the vaccine less effective? So there's a lot of work going on there. The virologists are key in that. They have to work with the epidemiologists in terms of monitoring the impact of these viruses. And we also have to work on artificial intelligence and every new working on how these viruses are changing and how can we just, anticipate that and have better vaccines at the end of it.
And I'd love to pin you down, if I may, there, Professor Bruno Lina. In your role, chair of the scientific committees of the Global Influenza and RSV Initiative and Global Influenza Hospital Surveillance Network, I'm sure there's an acronym. Getting down to that point again, what would you like to see then? How would you like to see it going forward? Are you comfortable to support the public-only funded, or would you like to see the private-public partnerships, the collaboration going forward?
It's already a collaboration, so it's and it's working very fine like that. And I think that there's an added value of having this collaboration because it's a way of getting money to do the work, and the way this has been built actually makes, like I said, it's a kind of charity business from the industry. I mean, to just provide money to get data from different countries. It's also somehow capacity building, and it's a large set of data that is collected within one network that gather a lot, that exchange ideas, that exchanges material, that think about the impact, and sometimes beyond what only influenza is in terms of what can do the vaccine in terms of disease prevention, but not only the infectious disease prevention, and go beyond what influenza vaccine can do, because overall, why are we all here is just to improve the health. So, and that's our business. And our business is to try to do the best to reduce the disease burden and the impact of these different viruses. And all these different tools that we have are just, small stones that just build up the system and helps us to have a better life.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to bounce a couple of those points over to Marco. Thank you so much for your contribution there. Gosh, the pharmaceutical industry is a charity. I think that's a novel one. But if you're building public trust and confidence and improving that brand image, maybe that's the way to go. Marco, what do you make of that? Those who hold the marketing authorizations, the MAHs, the marketing authorizations holders, what incentive is there then if money isn't coming that way, if there's no incentive coming through the PPPs? What are MAHs to do? How are they going to be incentivized?
This is a much broader discussion that is behind what I can really cover here, of course. And it's pretty obvious that if there is a marketing authorization, it will come with commitments. That's the reality of regulation today. So it's not like many years ago that once you got an approval, end of your regulatory work. No, it's not anymore like that, and cannot be like that. So it's clear for anybody in the private sector that once an approval is reached, then this has to be followed up via risk management plan and specific obligation. And this is not going to change and is set into the European legislation. So this will continue and will have to continue. Now, as said, in the context specifically of these studies that involve collecting data from public health authorities as secondary data collection and other cases like this, of course, is a more complex situation, and we have to see really what we can set up in an efficient way. And as said, we should explore that if the public side will take the responsibility of conducting these studies for a number of reasons, as we said before, then we should think what then is the role of the private sector and how they should contribute to this research. which can be maybe in funding at least part of the studies and maybe contributing to discussing also the result, because as we often seen, like in a pandemic like this one, but in other crises where there were other players that conducting clinical research, such as academic group or public health authorities, then at the end of the day, when it comes to the regulatory discussion, the submission has to be done by the industry, so by the marketing authorization holder. So they should be aware of what has been collected, what has been done, so that they can also bring up their position and their defense when they talk to us as regulators. And we have done our best to try to expand this possibility of having conversation between academic groups, industry, and regulators all together, because I think this is in the interest of everybody. And we will continue to do so, either in the context of this real world evidence, but even, you know, in the context of randomized clinical trials. Just to give an example on COVID, and again, sorry to be a bit boring, but unfortunately has taken away at least 2 years of my life. So I paid quite a bit of a toll here. If you look at the studies conducted by the Oxford University with the recovery platform, this data has been extremely important also to drive regulatory decisions on a number of therapeutics for the treatment of COVID-19. And there, what has been important is to make sure that there was a good connection between industry, the investigators, and ourselves, so that we can discuss in an open way all together these results and see if we can come up in a rapid way to a regulatory decision, which again will be in the best interest in terms of access to these products. And the same would be for vaccines. So we should continue down this path, even if I think one comment that was made that is important, and also during this pandemic came out quite clearly, that aside from transparency as one of the, you know, buzzword or keywords of the moment, and you know, we as EMA, we are publishing now the clinical trial results from all the pivotal studies that were submitted to us, which is quite of an effort, because indeed we have to make sure that there is no issue with the confidentiality and then the personal information. But it's true that a large part of the public believes that additional clinical evidence should be generated independently. So the word independence has also stepped up as an important factor. And, you know, that's the reality of the world in which we are living in, that people are demanding that also some evidence is collected independently from the private sector. Even if often they forget that indeed 95 or even 99% of the clinical trials that would support an authorization to start with are trials conducted by industry. Nevertheless, we have to face this, and it's not a matter of judgment, it's a matter of facing the reality and thinking about how we can address also these type of concerns.
Marco, thank you. There's so much again in there. Sibylle, you might like to pick up on a couple of those points. Particularly, I'm interested about the connection with the stakeholders in there that he refers to, making sure that everybody has clear communication, which has sometimes not been the issue, and that reality, that pragmatic approach. What do you make of this?
So I would like to congratulate EMA with regards to the transparency, because the 2 year of, I don't know if we should say nightmare, Marco, but the deliverable with regards to the quantity of information, data, safety, efficacy for all the different vaccines that has been really put on the market very, very quickly, unprecedented way. This contributed significantly to vaccines confidence. I mean, transparency, this is what was the ask from the citizens, and EMA definitely fulfilled that ask. It's complicated for the reasons that Marco said, but I think this is a demonstration that we can do it. With regards to the data itself, for the industry, it's critical to have access to data, because this is what is going to drive the next generation of vaccines. And our role is to ensure that the right product is available at the right place for the right population. So this is also a kind of chicken and egg type of discussion at some stage, but it is critical. And in fact, I have been as well with regards to this discussion about, well, but the public, they don't trust the industry. I think we are all part of this ecosystem, and we all have a role to play to build that trust towards the private sector. And I mentioned it with regards to what IMI initiated in that regard, and it's willingness to the public institutions to see that change or not. And I think this is really important because we all have a role to play with regards to that, and transparency is key. And from an industry standpoint, we have no issue at all with the independency of the public health institutions. We are supportive of this independency because this is the connections with the citizens and the trust. But there is nothing that stops having, as part of this independency, a transparent collaboration and communication that delivers for every stakeholders around the table. So that's, for me, something that needs to be done, a proper framework for transparent collaboration and communication.
And I wonder, Hannah, what you make of that. Sibylla touches on getting the right medicines at the right time. Supply chains, again, are absolutely vital in this. When you're going to have monitoring or disease surveillance, you can plan ahead. So how important do you think the whole issue of getting the medicines out there to the citizens at the right time is? How important is the supply chain issue in what we're considering here?
Certainly, if you're in charge in your country of your public's health, then it's important to have good quality products in no time at all. And this is a tall order that we saw with COVID, that we actually had very much need, and we were waiting for the regulators and the companies to deliver. But at the same time, we realized that we don't want to take a product that hasn't gone through the system and the machinery in the very same quality way that it did before. And I think we all need to congratulate both EMA and the market authorization holders for the rolling reviews and working day and night and 24/7 as they've done. Whether this is doable for the other products to come along, I think it's too tall an order. I don't think we're ready for it. But I think the expectation of people have now risen, and they probably would want to see this happening. At the same time, also, I have to say that many everyday citizens have grown to be epidemiologists themselves. So that I think with the transparency, the learning curve actually is very good right now, that people understand much more about infectious diseases and vaccines and products. So I think we should take use of that momentum and build on that transparency. And what FDA is doing or what EMA is doing, I mean, you're having your press conferences and you're sharing data, and FDA has gone even further, or CDC has gone further, that they hold their meetings all open. I mean, next week you can spend all your evenings looking at ACIP and FDA discussing their latest results. And maybe that's something that we should be doing here in Europe, and increasing to that transparency. It does take time and resources, but I think it may be worth it.
Thank you, yes. And that health literacy that you refer to there, perhaps some of us even understand some of the acronyms now, although that may take a little bit longer. It's been great getting some comments coming through. Just want to pick up on one here that came in saying, referring back to Cedric Mahes, mentioning that vaccines are developed by private sector with data for presentation to public sector regulatory bodies, effectively then a public-private partnership that's done in a legally structured, a formalized way. So why not acceptable in phase 4 as exemplified by DRIVE? Couldn't the EU specify rules and regulations outlining an acceptable governance structure as shown feasibly by DRIVE? Somebody here would like to pick that one up. Gentlemen, would you like to say who you are? Okay, we'll leave that one pending, and please give us your question and please say who you are.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Valtýr Thors. I'm a pediatric infectious diseases specialist from Iceland. Part of my work is on epidemiology of infectious diseases and vaccine studies in children. And I'd like to be make a point as an advocate for children. I think it's completely imperative that we carry on doing vaccine studies in children, because children are not small adults. And although many people see it as an ethical problem doing vaccine studies in children, it's actually unethical to do vaccine studies or medical studies in adults and then just transferring the data to children. And we were incredibly lucky with the COVID pandemic that children were relatively spared. But the result of that was that vaccines for children came last. And I think we need to have these platforms ready for studies, rapid studies in children, because the next pandemic is almost certainly lurking behind the corner somewhere. And we may not be that lucky next time around with regards to children.
Thank you for that point. I don't know if any of the panel want to pick up on that, or any other questions that are coming in. It's fantastic to have such an amazing audience here. A lady at the front would like to make a point, if the microphone could come there. And again, if you'd like to say who you are, please.
Yes, I'm Liz Miller, a member of the Independent Scientific Committee that was overseeing, in fact, the independence and the rigor with which the DRIVE consortium produced its results. I mean, I think that we had within DRIVE already the model that it seems that Marco is trying to create, but he's created the partnership without the manufacturers. I mean, those that took the trouble of actually looking at how DRIVE worked could see that there was no way that the manufacturers could fiddle the results, influence the results. The DRIVE partnership ensured that data that was being generated by public health agencies was utilized in order to allow the manufacturers to meet their post-marketing commitments, which had been dictated to them by EMA. So it seems, I was quite surprised that EMA then accepted that the hostility towards public-private partnerships was such that they had to drop that model, because I think it is reinforcing the hostility that would be possible to overcome. I mean, we saw very naked attacks on the scientific quality of the data that was coming out of DRIVE by public health institutions, particularly individuals in those public institutions, which were bordering to me on slanderous, basically.
Well, thank you. That's a very strong point. And we are coming to the close. And before I come to ask each of our speakers to give some closing thoughts and see how they'd like to take this forward, I'd like to thank you very much for those points. Strong words: hostility, attacks, slander. Okay, let's bounce that quickly to Marco. Very briefly, please. How do you respond to that?
Well, you know, as I said at the beginning, we were open to a model that's incorporated public-private partnership. And I have to mention, because I don't think anybody said that, there was another IMI project called Advance that came up really with a type of blueprint that look exactly into how this governance should be set up. So we have been always open to that type of model. And if I can respond to Liz, the point is that, you know, we have to be realistic and see if this does not fly with the key public health authorities in Europe and the ECDC to start with. For us, it's unavoidable also to think about what else we can do. So we have to maintain a certain degree of pragmatism, which does not mean that we have given up the view that the PPP as outlined in the governance of Advance, you know, would not work for us. It's simply that today does not seem possible to implement it rapidly. And therefore, we have to think about other tools, because at the end of the day, what matters is that we get this data.
Thank you. Well, let's just, for our three key panel speakers, I'd like to ask each of you just to come up with a nice punchy takeaway thought that nails your colors to the mast, that commits to taking this forward. Who would you like to see take this forward? Who should be responsible? Where should we go? Hannah, what is your closing takeaway message? What would you like the audience here, online, and the European Commission to hear?
Well, I concur with Liz that we do have a very strong model, and we build the transparency rules of collaboration to the way that, I think we've, in those 5 years, we've demonstrated that it works. What doesn't work always is your sample sufficient to answer the research questions that you have, but we've done our best given the slow or non-existent influenza epidemic during the past few years. So I think what we should do in public health institutes, mine included, to look into on what more would we want on top of this, what we already have developed. I think EMA and ECDC should do the same. It's too bad that ECD is not around the table here. We did invite them. They said it's too early for them to come here because they are building with EMA the new platform. And so I think that we should take what we have produced in 5 years' time, have EMA, ECDC revisit that and see on how we go forward from there. I think we owe it also to the European community, to the citizens.
Thank you. And Sibylia, your takeaway thought?
There is a bit of hope, I think, from what Marco has said today, and Hannah, and I think the issue is that we kind of preach the convinced, and indeed the fact that ECDC is not here is just the issue, because this is where we need to discuss together. I think it's important that leverage what works. I mean, we know what works. We know it from before the pandemic, but it was kind of hidden. The pandemic really highlighted what works. The IMI initiative shows what works. So let's leverage what is working and be responsible with a good use of our resources and focus on what is not working today.
Right.
And that's critical. There are plenty of things that are not working today and that have impact on public health. And just to close on from my side is why we are so punchy about vaccine hesitancy and the anti-vax movement. We want to change. This is unacceptable. This is a cost from a public health standpoint. But here is exactly the same paradigm with regards to industry skepticisms, kind of. So why we should not take the same stance with regards to ensure that we can have those public-private collaborations to deliver on the public health and the protection of the citizens, and reflect a little bit on what we are doing and saying with regard to vaccines hesitancy and anti-vax movement towards what we are doing today with the public-private partnership.
Thank you. And Mark, I'm going to ask you to be very, very brief indeed, please. Just tell us very quickly, what do you make of this? Or what do you commit to in terms of, as Sibylia was saying, leveraging what works?
Right. So I think we need to take stock of the experience of DRIVE and look at what has been the lesson learned and what we can take from there, and see whether this model can be used in specific circumstances or in any other case for which there is a need to generate additional evidence. Of course, as said, we are now committed to work with the ECDC with the build-up of this platform. And the starting point is that the two agencies are taking the lead here. But I believe that, we should take stock of all the good learning of the public-private partnership and see and discuss more in detail how to interact with industry, because I believe we need to continue on that. Of course, we as regulators, we're used to interact with industry. We do every day. So for us, it's not a problem, but we do understand that other authorities, they are more afraid of entering into this type of dialogue. And I think, if this is done with the appropriate caveats and in the appropriate way, I don't see any problem with that. Actually, there is a lot of added value.
Thank you very much indeed. Gosh, it seems that we've almost got to some agreement at the end there. I would like to thank all our speakers here in the room, online, everyone who's contributed. It seems we've just opened the dialogue, got the conversation going, but it does need to be taken forward. And it does seem to me that perhaps this is too important not to get right. So I hope there's a commitment to keep the discussions going, to take this forward. Thank you very much indeed to our speakers. Thank you to the organizers, the tech team there who made it all happen. And thank you, the audience online, for listening. From me, bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.